Washington Journal continues.
C-SPAN is in Iowa this week following the caucuses, which will take place tonight. They start at 7 o'clock local time. That's 8 o'clock Eastern time. C-SPAN will be on the ground joining caucuses in the state, watching everything unfold there. Our next guest is Jesse Benton. He's the Ron Paul for President National Campaign Chairman. Good morning and thanks for joining us.
Good morning, Libby. Thanks.
Who makes up the Ron Paul constituency in Iowa? Who are you hearing from who are joining your team?
We bring together a really broad and diverse coalition. We have evangelical Christians, homeschoolers, working class people, students, young people. We have probably the most diverse constituency out there, and that's because Ron is the candidate that really supports liberty and supports freedom. And the wonderful thing about freedom is freedom brings people together. There's a piece for everybody in freedom, and that's what's so great about America, so great about Ron Paul and this message, that it unites people.
The Washington Post has a blurb here today talking about Rick Santorum weighing in, and it says that he's taken some swings at your candidate, Ron Paul, arguing that the Texas Republican is more in line with liberal anti-war Representative Dennis Kucinich than with the Republican Party. What do you make of that?
Well, Rick Santorum's willing to say a lot of crazy, wild things. The thing about Ron is, like I said, freedom brings people together, and Ron's willing to work with broad coalitions. Sure, he finds some common ground with someone like Dennis Kucinich, but he's also the most conservative member of the Congress. He votes for the least amount of taxes, the least amount of spending, the most limited government. So to say that he's in line with Dennis Kucinich is simply false. But don't we want a president that can work with people across party lines? Ron can bring together coalitions of progressives, independents, conservatives, and that's what we need in a president, someone that can bring us together right now to deal with these horrible problems that we're facing.
Well, you mentioned some of the ways you see Ron Paul as having conservative values, but one feature of Iowa voters, Iowa Republicans, is that they tend to poll as religious conservatives. Since Ron Paul is considered more of a libertarian on social issues, how are you making inroads with the evangelical base?
Well, I mean, Ron is a Christian. We're a Christian family, and we're regular church attendees. We read the Bible in our home, and Ron is a religious conservative. I think the message that we send to evangelicals and religious conservatives, send it repeatedly over and over again, is that big government in Washington is a threat, the biggest threat to our conservative Christian values out in the heartland. And I think a lot of evangelicals get that. That Washington is, the engine behind No Child Left Behind and the political correctness driving religion from the public square. We have to get big government out of the way so we can protect our values back out here in real America.
Jesse Benton is the National Campaign Chairman for Ron Paul for President. Here are the numbers to call to join the conversation. We're talking about Iowa caucuses, which are being held this evening. Democrats, 202-737-0001. Republicans, 202-737-0002. Independent callers, 202-628-0205. And if you're an Iowa resident, you can call us at 202-628-0184. Taking a look at a story from ABC News, does Ron Paul see himself in the Oval Office? Not really. And here's what the blog post says by Terry Moran. An amazing admission tonight from Ron Paul. In an exclusive interview, I asked him, when you lay your head on your pillow at night, do you see yourself in the Oval Office? Not really, he said. He went on to say that he's not blind to the odds, but they are not as slim as they were 25 years ago. Hard to imagine any other candidate saying that. So, Jesse Benton, is Ron Paul delivering the message of confidence that he could win this race, or is he, does this article indicate that he might not think he could win the race?
Well, we wouldn't be in this race if we didn't think Ron could win. Ron wouldn't be doing this if he didn't think that he could win. Now, we have to be sober and realistic. I mean, Ron is taking on the entire establishment. The neoconservative foreign policy establishment, the monetary establishment, the big spending establishment in Washington. We have to realize just the hurdles that we face when we're taking all of that on. We have to be sober about it. We can't promise everybody that Ron is going to be president tomorrow. The other thing about Ron is he doesn't have a deep personal desire to be president. He's not motivated by personal ambition. He's motivated by a sincere desire to help fix this country, to restore our core American principles of liberty, limited government. And I think that's a very, very positive thing. That means that he is more motivated by principle than personal ambition. So many other politicians, they want to hold office, they want to be president because they really want the power. They want to be president. That's not what motivates Ron. He doesn't sit around, like he said, when his head hits the pillow at night, he doesn't lay in bed and fantasize about being president. He fantasizes about returning our country back to our great American traditions of liberty, limited government, personal freedom, personal responsibility. And I think that's what we need in the president right now. We need someone that will put principle above personal ambition, above personal politics, and that's what Ron Paul will deliver.
Iowa Representative Steve King said that if elected president, Ron Paul would actually be dangerous. This is what the congressman said. What Ron Paul supporters need to think about if they think they can elect him as president, a commander-in-chief can order all the armed forces back to the United States. That means no presence anywhere on the globe. Our enemies can fill that vacuum with very little resources, and I'm troubled by that. This is something that Representative King told The Hill. What's your response, Jesse Benton?
Well, I think Representative King is misguided on thinking that that's dangerous. Look, with our tactical military right now, we can have boots on the ground anywhere in the world launched from the United States within 13 hours. We can project power all around the globe with our nuclear submarines, which Dr. Paul is a big advocate of, with our bombers, with our Air Force. We don't need to have troops stationed all over the world. Right now, we have about 900 bases scattered around the world, and it is bankrupting us. Why do we have 50,000 troops in Germany? Why do we have 30,000 troops in South Korea? We continue to subsidize the security of other wealthy nations. President Paul will bring troops home so we can defend our borders, save a ton of money, start taking care of people at home, at the same time make sure we have a stronger national defense that we can repel any threat, and quite frankly, just get back to a much more pro-American foreign policy. I don't think that's dangerous at all. I think that's very pro-American. That's the foreign policy that we need. A strong national defense, no policing the world, no nation building. That's the foreign policy of the Founding Fathers, and that's what Ron Paul will bring to America.
Joe weighs in on Twitter and says Ron Paul will be president if the people vote for him. Nothing else will determine that. It doesn't matter if he believes he'll win or not, or if he's a likely candidate. And Joe's responding to the article we just mentioned from ABC, an interview done with candidate Representative Ron Paul. Let's go to Cleveland, Ohio, and hear what Justin has to say. Democratic caller, good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for taking my call. My comment to Jesse Benton was I saw your Andrea Mitchell interview yesterday, and I thought that was a really good interview. One of my predictions is that Ron will actually overperform due to the Democrat and independents siding with him. I used to be a Hillary Clinton supporter myself, but not anymore. Thank you very much, and go Ron Paul.
Well, thank you for that. And I think the caller just hit it right on the head. That's why Ron would be the best nominee in this Republican field, because of his tremendous crossover support. If Ron's a nominee, the Republicans will rally behind him, and Ron has tremendous appeal to independents and Democrats. That is good for the Republican Party. It will build the Republican Party for the future, and it's also how you win general elections. And finally, I mean, it's what our country needs. Our country needs someone that can unite people, bring together Democrats, independents, progressives, conservatives, libertarians, bring them all together and get working on these serious problems that we face.
Do you expect independents and even Democrats to cross over and join the Republican caucus process tonight?
There will be a lot of independents coming out, and Ron Paul dominates the independent vote. As far as Democrats, hey, we welcome Democrats. We welcome anyone that wants to come and vote for Ron and vote for liberty. I'm not that optimistic that many Democrats are going to do it. I don't think that many registered Democrats are going to want to come tonight, register Republican, and participate in the Republican process. I don't think that's where very, very many of Ron's votes come from. But that said, they're welcome to come. We hope that they do come. I hope I'm wrong. I hope that 20% of the Democrat Party changes to Republican tonight, registers Republican, votes for Ron, and then they stay in the Republican Party, and we build a broad coalition based behind freedom and liberty.
Stephen on Twitter writes, I would consider Dr. Paul if he didn't run on the Republican platform, so there's a possible crossover vote. Let's go to Iowa City, where Brent is on the line. Good morning.
Good morning to you guys.
Go right ahead.
Well, I just think that Ron Paul is going to pull out a victory this evening. When people think of Iowa, they might think of a lot of old country folk, but here in Iowa City especially, we have a lot of young, well-thought-out individuals, and I think we're going to pull out the young vote out tonight, too, to lead Ron Paul to a victory.
Brent, tell us about what you're going to do tonight. Or do you consider yourself part of those young voters?
Yes, we're going to rally them up. Sometimes people think that the young vote will not get out there, but we're going to rally them together and lead them to a victory.
Brent, here's a question for you and for our guest. The caucus is happening at a time when a lot of colleges, of course, are on break. Are folks, I mean, there's not that opportunity to get students en masse out from a college campus, from a university. Is that going to affect things? Let's hear what you have to say, Brent.
Not necessarily. Iowa City here alone has about 15,000 students still in town that I have confidence that the majority of them are polling for Ron Paul and are tired of the same old politics, and he brings real change. Obama ran on change, and then he just ran us up in debt. Ron Paul brings real change, and we'll see that tonight. Thanks, guys.
Let's go to Jesse Benton.
Well, Brent's hitting it right on the head. We are really counting on the youth vote tonight. You know, it's always assumed that the youth vote doesn't turn out. And in past elections, it's true, young people haven't turned out. But, I mean, I challenge young people in Iowa tonight to take a look at the choices they have, take a look at Ron Paul, and realize that your future depends on the real change that Ron Paul can bring. I mean, we've got to do this. As a younger person myself, I'm 34. I look at this future. I have a young daughter. Look at the future of this country, and I'm worried. We need to start taking direct, bold action, or we're going to lose the promise of America. And that's serious. I really hope that the young people do turn out, and I'm confident that they will.
And what about this issue of the schools being out of session? The semester is not in full swing. Will that have an effect?
Well, you know, we were projecting that the Iowa caucuses were going to be January 3rd, way back in the summer. We've planned for it. It does add a little bit extra layer of organizational sophistication needed to make sure that we have people ID'd and called. We can't just go walking through the dorms and knocking on the doors and dragging people to the caucuses. However, we're still contacting students. We're letting them know. We're making sure they know where their precinct locations are back at home. So we planned for it, and we're ready for it.
Our guest, Jesse Benton, is the national campaign chairman of Ron Paul for president. Politico quoted him a couple of months ago saying that his candidate must finish in the top 3 in Iowa and New Hampshire in order to win the Republican presidential nomination. Jesse Benton, do you still feel that way?
I do. That's always been our goal. Top 3 in Iowa, top 3 in New Hampshire, and then we're rolling on to the early caucus states. We have great organizations in multiple early caucus states rolling through February and into Super Tuesday. We're going to roll hard into Louisiana, Nevada, and Maine in February. On Super Tuesday, we're looking at Minnesota, Kansas, Colorado, Washington State, North Dakota, just to name a few. We have staff there, boots on the ground, offices. We've been working hard. We're sending mail, contacting voters, and we're working hard. We are the only campaign outside of Mitt Romney that has this organization throughout the country. We're the only campaign, again, outside of Mitt Romney that has a comprehensive plan to win the 1,100 delegates necessary to be the Republican nominee. We're working hard towards that goal, and that's why I make a very strong argument that now this campaign is coming down to Mitt Romney and Ron Paul. Status quo in the establishment versus real change in the American grassroots.
A story just out from the AP out of Des Moines. Mitt Romney on Tuesday backpedaled a bit from his earlier prediction of a first-place finish in the Iowa caucuses. Romney said on MSNBC, "It's hard to predict exactly what's going to happen. I think I'll be among the top group." Last night he was more aggressive, telling hundreds of supporters in the Iowa town of Clyde that he would win Tuesday's caucuses and eventually the Republican nomination for president. Do you see that as giving a little ground to your camp?
They look at the same numbers that we do. They have a very sophisticated polling operation, as do we. You know, we have it as a dead heat between Ron and Mitt. I'm sure that their people do too. The worst thing that you want to do in this race is overpromise and underperform. So I'm sure Governor Romney was told by his staff to backpedal on that a little bit. This is a dead heat, Iowans. If you want real change, please come out, caucus for Ron Paul. He's the only guy that can deliver it. If you're happy with the status quo and the establishment, you know, Governor Romney's the choice there.
Mike is a Republican in Lakeville, Minnesota. Good morning, Mike.
Oh, hi. How you doing?
Good. As a Minnesotan, are you supporting Michelle Bachmann?
No. The main thing is, what I love about Ron Paul is he wants to abolish the Federal Reserve, which is maybe not abolish it, but he wants to fix it, because we have some real serious problems with America, with our Federal Reserve. Once I think he does get in there and he starts to fix it, he's going to actually stimulate the economy. And a second thing is, and this has nothing to do with Ron Paul, and I want all the politicians to know this, that it's known that the United States government has had contact with aliens from other planets, and if they don't come clean, their legacies are going to be affected, and I guarantee that. Thank you.
Well, I don't know very much about aliens, but I do know a little bit about the Federal Reserve, and he's absolutely right on that point. We need to get a handle around the Federal Reserve, and Ron Paul has been ringing this bell for 30 years. Most recently, he was able to lead a broad coalition in Congress to get some audit legislation passed into the financial reform bill. He brought together, and this is an example of Congressman Paul's leadership, brought together every single Republican and over 100 Democrats, including the most conservative members of the House and some of the most progressive liberal members of the House, to get behind an audit of the Federal Reserve. We were able to pass it through hard grassroots lobbying, pass it and get it passed as part of the financial reform package. Dr. Paul wants to do more. We need more transparency and a deeper audit of the Federal Reserve. And Dr. Paul is going to bring that leadership to the Oval Office. We're going to get our hands around the Federal Reserve and stop this secretive printing press money, stop bailing out Wall Street, stop bailing out foreign banks, and stop doing that on the backs of the poor and the middle class in this country.
Here's a question by email from Maggie in Cape Canaveral, Florida. She asks, how does Ron Paul plan to enforce his stance against abortion that asserts life begins at the moment of conception? Won't that invade human rights and privacy? Will it be like China, enforcing their one-child policy in reverse? So how do you marry Representative Paul's libertarian views with his pro-life views?
Well, Dr. Paul is very right to life. You know, he's a OB/GYN, he's delivered over 4,000 babies, and he believes that, he knows that life begins at conception. He has a two-pronged approach. One is he would push legislation, he calls it we the people legislation, but legislation that could be passed by simple majority, signed into law by the president, by President Paul, to remove jurisdiction over legislation from the federal courts, essentially overturn Roe v. Wade by legislation, turn it back to the states, allow states to decide. Iowa, I bet, would be a pro-life state in 6 months. We'd start saving the lives of millions of babies. I bet we'd have 30 pro-life states within 2 years. Dr. Paul also supports a right-to-life amendment to the Constitution, and we would have to sign that. We'd have to come together as a people and, you know, consensus, pass a constitutional amendment defining life as beginning at conception, and Dr. Paul will advocate for that too. But Dr. Paul will be the most pro-life president, I think, ever, because he will take pragmatic steps to save unborn innocent life and start allowing states to pass their own laws and become right-to-life states. At the same time, he's going to work for a long-term consensus solution by passing a right-to-life amendment.
Let's hear from Angela, who joins us from Arlington, Virginia. Good morning.
Hi, good morning, and thanks for taking my call. I'm an independent, but I vote more along Republican lines than I do Democratic lines. I am really disappointed at the list of Republican presidential candidates that we have. A lot of them are filled with hatred. I like Dr. Paul, but there's some hypocrisy. You know, Dr. Paul talks about small government. He's been in government for over 35 years. You know, when he got into government, his base salary was $44,000. Now it's $180,000. Okay, and now his son has joined. You know, it's like a family business. And that does increase overhead. And that's why we have bigger government. So there is hypocrisy. What do you have to say to that?
Well, you know, that's that's a tough charge, and that's why Dr. Paul has led the charge in Congress every year to cut congressional pay, at very least freeze some of the automatic pay increases. Another thing you might not know about Dr. Paul is he refuses to participate in the congressional pension program. He thinks it's too much. It's too much on the backs of the taxpayers, and he doesn't participate. I think it's kind of sick that Anthony Weiner is going to retire to a $50,000 or $60,000 a year pension when he had to resign in disgrace. Dr. Paul doesn't participate in that and won't accept it. You're right, career politicians are strangling this country, but if you look at Dr. Paul's record, Dr. Paul is different. He's been fighting against the establishment, against the Washington machine for years. And if you're looking at him personally profiting, that's just not the case. As a matter of fact, he's cost himself millions of dollars by taking himself out of his medical practice. If he was just looking to line his own pockets, he would have stayed in Lake Jackson, Texas, kept delivering babies. He'd be a lot wealthier today. But he just has that personal passion for liberty. He really feels that he felt an obligation to be involved, and an obligation to speak out, an obligation to work for this real change. Now our country is at the point where we sorely need this real change, and people are waking up to that. And thankfully, Dr. Paul's still there to try to help lead us back.
Jesse Benton is the national campaign chairman for Ron Paul for president. That website is ronpaul2012.com. He's worked on Capitol Hill, in conservative activist organizations, and in numerous winning political campaigns. Most recently, he served as co-founder and senior vice president of Campaign for Liberty, a national grassroots action group, and as campaign manager for Senator Rand Paul. Not to be morbid or out of turn, Jesse Benton, but there is a question about the age of Ron Paul. It hasn't been talked about a whole lot, but the congressman is 76, I believe. Gary writes on Twitter and asks, can we count on him to live through a first term? How old was his dad when he died? How were the genes? And Gary says his choice of a vice presidential candidate will be critical.
Well, his dad was in his 90s, and I can tell you absolutely that Ron is the fittest man I've ever met. He walks over 3 miles a day and routinely bikes 15 miles a day in addition to that. He's just fit. He is really, really active, really, really engaged. His mind is sharp, and his ideas are young. I think that's the most important thing. You know, I also look at Ron's age as a real benefit. He has the wisdom and the experience to look at the problems that we face, to be able to be steady, to be able to be unwavering in the face of all the challenges that he will face as president. The president, whoever's president of the United States, and if it's Ron Paul, is going to face a lot of scrutiny, a lot of blowback, a lot of challenges, and Dr. Paul's age, wisdom, breadth of experience is going to give him the backbone to stay the course and do the right things and help get our country back.
Sheila writes to us by email and says she thinks that Congressman Paul is too old, going on 77. At re-election, he would be 81, so she doesn't see a chance of re-election. You just answered some of Sheila's concerns, but what do you think his age does for a re-election bid in 4 years?
Again, Ron's the fittest guy I know. Anybody that's concerned about his age should come down to our little town of Lake Jackson, Texas, in August, when it's about 100 degrees and the humidity is about 100%, and they can go on a 20-mile bike ride with Ron all around town. They can see if they can keep up.
All right, let's go to Syracuse, New York. Chris, Democrats line. Good morning. Hi, Chris. Last try, Chris. You're on the program. Let's move on to China. Republican caller in Fort Stockton, Texas. Good morning.
Well, yes, ma'am. Actually, I'm a newfound Republican. I used to be a Democrat, and I've been watching this fella, Ron Paul, and I've just basically changed parties because of him. And I'm just, in the nicest way, I'd like to ask, is there any way that not just C-SPAN, but all the journalists on at least 5 stations, including Fox, with the possible exception of Judge Napolitano, can you guys get any less shameless, or any more shameless, I should say, about hedging against Ron Paul? I mean, every angle that you guys cover is so angled against him. I can't believe he must be doing really phenomenal in the online polls. I feel like you wouldn't be even mentioning his name, just like in 2008, you wouldn't even be breathing his name if he wasn't getting like 95% in the real polls. Because it's just, if it's not clear to you, perhaps somebody should go in the other trailer and take, you know, like a clear, objective look at how you come across.
Well, I think you raise a valid point, and that's that I don't think the mainstream media quite understands what's going on here. I don't think they understand the breadth or the depth of Ron Paul's support. I don't think they quite understand the issues. I don't entirely blame them, because I don't think we've ever seen anything like this before in American politics. You know, we can get frustrated, or we can just keep chopping wood and press on forward. And I choose the latter option. I don't wring my hands and, oh, the media, the media, the media. Do I get frustrated from time to time? Sure. I'm human too, just like you. But I'm just going to press onward. We're going to keep spreading the message. We're going to use our campaign resources, which fortunately, due to the generosity of our donors, are very substantial. We're going to communicate directly to the voters and to the people, and then we're going to work with the media and try to bring them around. There are some journalists that are really starting to get it. There's some journalists that don't get it. But we're just going to continue to push ahead, and like I said, we're going to keep chopping wood.
Silver Spring, Maryland, where Jake joins us, Independent Line. Good morning.
Hey, good morning. Happy New Year. I wish our country a Happy New Year. And I just wanted to make a couple comments, maybe one question at the end. And I was going to say that, you know, I'm a middle-aged family man. I've been married for 8 years, and my daughter's going to be 5 in a couple of weeks, and that's really what this is all about for me. What an exciting day we've got here, and an opportunity to finally stand up for the real change we need in America. Freedom, civil liberties, end the wars, and I'm 100% behind Dr. Paul. Cautiously optimistic that we can pull this thing through with the grassroots in Iowa this evening. And I had one question, and I wanted to ask, what is the campaign doing to monitor the results of the caucus? And I'll be praying for you guys tonight.
Well, the caller right there is an example why Dr. Paul is the most viable candidate against President Obama. The people are saying they want real change, and this gentleman was a Democrat. He's pulling for Ron Paul. He realizes that Ron Paul will bring real change. Ron Paul can build the broad coalition. Republicans, independents, Democrats, bring them together, unite people, work to solve our problems as president. We are monitoring the results tonight very closely. Through our long-term activism, we have multiple supporters, I believe 5 supporters on the Iowa State Central Committee, and they have been working very closely with the Iowa Republican Party to make sure that everything's above board, and we have a lot of confidence in that. Chairman Matt Strawn has been a real gentleman, and we feel very confident where there will be a location, centralized location, where we will have campaign representatives there watching all the ballots and the totals calculated, and we're confident everything's above board, and we're just going to continue pressing through with the process.
Do you think that voters in Iowa and nationally are still troubled by the newsletters that came out in the 1980s and 1990s, newsletters that bore Ron Paul's name, that contained some controversial comments and racially charged statements?
Well, anybody that is troubled, I'll tell them again that Dr. Paul did not write them. He did not see them before they went out, and he disavows them. He detests that stuff went out under his name. It's not what he believes in. It's not what he's talked about for 35 years of public life. He has taken responsibility for them, because he said, as the publisher of that newsletter, he should have policed it better. He was back in medicine full time. He was busy delivering babies on an OB schedule. He should have been more on top of it. So he's apologized for it, taken responsibility, disavowed that content. I think what anybody that's unsure or still is bothered by this stuff, you need to go look at Ron's speeches. Ron has given literally thousands of speeches to hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people over the past 35 years. Go look at his speeches, look at the transcripts. That stuff is not in line with what he said. Dr. Paul supports individual liberty and the dignity of individual rights for everybody.
Robert is in Avon, Connecticut on our Democrats line. Good morning.
Hello, good morning.
Hi, Robert. You're on the program.
Yes, good morning. Jesse, great job. Just wish to thank the road to the White House for its actual coverage of giving Ron Paul and his supporters some time. My question is to Jesse. I'm wondering how you're holding up to the biased and non-biased media. I'm more or less a news hog, and I watch. I'm a surfer, and I've seen some pretty interesting comments being made to the other candidates, but almost nothing to Ron Paul. And I'm wondering what your future, I guess, ideas would be to get by this, because as you know, it seems like most of the people out there, or most of the media, treat the everyday average person as a sheeple, and if you don't follow their ways, you're left behind. And I'm wondering if you have any ideas, such as more media on the internet, or what is your thoughts on getting by this sheeple kind of activity if you don't belong to other candidates?
I think you raise a very valid problem, and that is that there is a lot of big special interest, establishment, corporatism in the media, and they're guarding their turf. And, they don't want to properly cover a candidate like Ron that challenges their status quo. I think you also brought up one of the best ways to challenge that, and that is through independent online media. The internet is such a tremendous resource for information. C-SPAN recently just had on Craig Robinson from the Iowa Republican. I don't always agree with what the Iowa Republican does or says, but I can tell you they're an excellent publication. They get out real unbiased information and real grassroots kind of commentary. And I thank Craig and everybody that writes on the Iowa Republican for doing that kind of stuff. We need to have more independent journalism, more stuff online, and I challenge people out there to every day supplement your reading by reading blogs. If you're eating your course of news for the day, have some from the mainstream media, some from cable, some from the internet. Read international news. The information's out there, and that's what is so promising. Eat a full course buffet of information every day, and that's how we'll stay ahead of this thing. Another thing too is we do have to realize that the news business, the news industry, they are in the entertainment business too, and they want to appeal to the people. A lot of what they do is going to reflect the attitudes of the people and what the people are demanding. So contact the news organizations. Let them know what you want as a consumer of their product. Say, as a consumer of your product, I want this. This is what I'm looking for. If I consistently don't get it, I'm going to go to another product. There is a lot of competition out there for the advertising dollar and for eyeballs of people. So vote with your eyeballs. Vote with your dollars. Let news organizations know when you're displeased. Also, let them know when you're happy. That's one thing that has actually really, really helped Dr. Paul, is when he gets a positive interview, when he gets a fair shake, we are told by the media outlets that, wow, this was amazing. We put Ron Paul online, and it was the most watched video we'd had ever. We had Ron Paul on for an interview, and we got 3,000 emails thanking us and saying it was great. So be involved, be an engaged consumer, and we'll work with this.
Let's take a listen to candidate Representative Ron Paul on CNN Sunday, talking about whether or not he'd run as a third-party candidate.
I haven't even thought about it, except when people like you keep asking me about it, because I have a race going. I'm essentially tied for first place, and why would I even consider doing anything like that? But I don't like absolutes. I don't want to say I will never do so and so, but I have no plans in doing it. We're doing very, very well, and people should just be a little bit patient. On Tuesday we're going to find out a lot more about the future of this election.
Congressman Ron Paul on CNN Sunday. Jesse Benton, what do you think about your candidate's viability as a third-party candidate? Should he not be able to keep going forward in the Republican field?
Well, if Ron did decide to run independent, he would be very viable. There have been multiple public polls that show him starting off in the 20s. That said, Ron, there's virtually no chance that Ron's going to run independent. He just doesn't want to do it, and I don't blame him. Our system is so biased against independent and third-party runs, and Ron has his home in the Republican Party. Senator Rand Paul, whose campaign I managed, when asked these sort of questions, would say something that I liked, and he said that political parties are empty vessels unless we imbue them with values. And Dr. Paul is trying to imbue the Republican Party with the values of the Founding Fathers, of the Constitution, and of the platform that the Republican Party says they stand for. So that's Dr. Paul's mission and goal right now, and I just don't see an independent bid in his future.
There's an article in the Wall Street Journal called "Meditators Back Paul for Peace," and it talks about how seekers of peace and personal fulfillment have streamed over the past 3 decades to this epicenter in Fairfield, Ohio, of transcendental meditation, known for its ties to the Beatles' one-time spiritual leader. And it talks about how many people there are voting for Ron Paul as a peace candidate. What do you make of that as part of your coalition?
Sure. You know, Dr. Paul is the peace candidate, and the peace candidate has a great track record of winning in American elections. Look at Eisenhower was elected to end Korea. Nixon was elected to end Vietnam. Barack Obama won as the peace candidate against John McCain, and really, I mean, George W. Bush won running criticizing the Clinton foreign policy for intervention in Somalia and Kosovo. George W. Bush ran on a humbler foreign policy, no nation building, no policing the world. People want peace. Dr. Paul understands that peace requires strength. He understands that to be able to have peace, we need a stronger national defense. We need to bring our troops home, stop overextending them around the world. We need to rebuild our military, and we need to quit these trillion-dollar foreign wars. It doesn't help our defense. It undermines our defense. Dr. Paul will deliver a stronger national defense. He'll make America strong, make sure we have the greatest military in the world, and he'll bring peace.
Let's hear what Jeremy has to say in Sacramento, California, Republican line.
Good morning, C-SPAN. Mr. Benton, I have a couple questions for you. Obviously, the first one's the newsletters. That's basically like blaming Ariana Huffington for some of the controversial stuff that's written in the Huffington Post, and just about any other newsletter, blog agency on the internet. So it's irrelevant as far as I'm concerned, and I think that the corporate mainstream media is playing that up way too much than what it should be. My questions for you are relating to how Ron Paul communicates items to people. And basically most of the public, I think, is pretty ignorant because they just follow whatever mainstream media has to say. And when he says we're broke, and he constantly says we're broke, he never ever puts it to the point of explaining just exactly how we're broke and how it affects people personally. He doesn't say your money's worth less. He doesn't say things about when you go down to the grocery store, you put gas in your tank, you get less and less and less, the devaluation of our money. I think he has a problem there where he does not communicate how it personally relates to people in this country of what's going on and what Washington is doing to our currency and to the state of this nation of spending money everywhere else out in the world. And we need to bring that money back, and our standard of living will continue to decline until we do that.
You bring up a great point. You hit the nail right on the head, and that's what we're trying to explain to people. That's what we're trying to communicate. It's difficult, it's tough, and you're right. We can do better. We need to continue to do better because we need to wake up this entire country. Fortunately, we've woken up a good chunk of them, and Dr. Paul always says that he's striving to do better. He realizes that he's not the perfect messenger. I think he's a wonderful messenger. I think he's the best messenger we've ever had, but he realizes that he can do better. We realize that he can do better. The campaign can do better. We need to continue to fine-tune the message, hone it, and I think you're right. One step we can do is to try to continue to personalize the message and let people know how this affects them. What does it mean that we have a $15 trillion deficit? What does it mean that our deficit now exceeds our GDP? What does it mean that the Fed is creating trillions of dollars out of thin air? What does it mean if the Fed starts to bail out the European sovereign debt crisis? What will that mean for the purchasing power of our dollar? How will that affect our seniors when the purchasing power of their dollar plummets, but they remain on a fixed income? You're right. It's a big message. It's powerful. It's important. We need to do better. We're going to keep working at that.
A viewer from Illinois wrote us an email that says he thinks Ron Paul's legislative record is not impressive. His message is impressive, like President Obama's message was during his campaign. When President Obama met Congress, the reality set in and resistance impaired progress. Do you think the same would happen to Ron Paul?
Well, I would disagree that his legislative record is not impressive. The thing is, I think Congress is very unimpressive. Ron Paul has gone to Washington and introduced big ideas, real change. He's advocated, he's voted no so many times, often stood by himself voting no, saying, no, stop this unconstitutional government, stop this spending, stop this madness. He's been a lone voice, he has been a shining example, and he has had some real legislative success, too, as the country has started to come his way. His passage of legislation to audit the Federal Reserve, bringing together a broad coalition of Republicans and Democrats, I think is very impressive. As a matter of fact, I think that's unprecedented to bring together such a broad coalition to pass such substantial, meaningful legislation. You know, Ron is very open that just electing him president isn't going to be a magic bullet, but electing him president would send a tremendous message to the people in Washington that the people are demanding real change. We're only going to get real change when the people's attitude reflects that. And Congress will follow if the people demand it. Sending Ron Paul to the Oval Office will send a tremendous message that there is time for change. And I'd put out one other thing, too. Ron has some very pragmatic tools at his disposal to, pass his plan to restore America and to cut $1 trillion in 1 year out of the budget, to get the budget balanced in his first term. And that is the veto of the debt limit. Ron's plan would eliminate about $1.7 trillion in what we consider phony debt to the Federal Reserve, wipe it off the books and get us down below the federal debt limit. Due to just the massive spending out of control, probably put us less than $1 trillion under the federal debt limit. Ron would introduce his plan to Congress and say, this is my plan. I think this is common sense. He'd bring people together from the left and the right, Democrats and Republicans, and say, let's have a dialogue about this. Let's discuss it. How can we tweak and modify this plan? Come together, bring people together, set priorities, make sure we honor our veterans, our seniors, fund our priorities, make sure we have the strongest national defense in the world, and get this budget passed. And he would have the ultimate stick of saying that we have this one chance to pass a meaningful cuts and meaningful budget reform, because if you don't, I will veto any attempt to raise the debt limit. He'll have the amazing bully pulpit of saying, we're not going any more into debt. We're not raising this debt limit, and we're going to have to come together and work on cutting. Get this budget balanced. It's going to happen because I will veto any increase in the debt limit.
Let's get one last caller in for Jesse Benton. This is Kathy in Manzanita, Oregon, on our independent line. Hi, Kathy.
Good morning. Thank you for taking my call. I feel that we, the people, we're broken when a presidential candidate cannot articulate liberty. Because recently on the Jan Nicholson show in Iowa, Ron Paul was not able to articulate the meaning of liberty. And yesterday he stated, quote, protect liberty, end of quote. But how can Ron Paul protect liberty when he cannot even articulate what liberty means in the United States? Therefore, he does not have my vote.
Well, Ron Paul's not going to get everybody. But with all due respect to Kathy, I think Ron is the most outspoken, eloquent advocate of liberty. He's been speaking about liberty for 35 years, and he says he's not always the perfect messenger, but he sure tries, and I think he's wonderful. I don't think anyone's spoken out more consistently, more articulately, and more passionately for liberty, and that's why I'm so proud to work for him.
Jesse Benton is the national campaign chairman of Ron Paul for President. That website is ronpaul2012.com, and we're watching to see how Congressman Paul performs tonight in the Iowa caucuses. Jesse Benton, thanks so much.
Thank you very much.
Glad you could be here with us this morning.